Okay, so in this tutorial we are going to cover the list box. So if you like to define the list box, it can be defined simply as an items control, which displays a collection of items. Okay, that being said, let's start our tutorial. So right now I have a grid with 3 columns, and let's start with adding a list box. So this list box, I'm not going to set the column and row, so it's going to be inside my first column. All right, let's add a child element, and the child element is a list box item, and list box items is really a content control. So I'm going to type in item 1 here. This is just string I'm adding as a content to my list box item. But in reality, it doesn't have to be just string. It can be really anything else. Let's say I want to add an ellipse. I can do so just inside my list box item, between the list box item open and close tags. I can type in ellipse and give it some height and width. Let's go 30 by 30 and give it a fill of red and close it out. So now I have text item child as a child element, and then an ellipse as the child element of list box. So if you run this, it will run without any problem. So that's just to show you that the list box item is a content control, and it can be really anything based on your need. So I'm going to remove that and add another list box item that's text only. So here we added the content in between the open close tags. The other way of doing it is set the content property to just the text itself. That does the same job. Okay. Let's add a couple more of these guys. Let's call this item 3 and item 4. So right now I can see that actually the text is too small for my eyes at least. So I'm going to create a simple style up here as a window resource that's going to apply to my list box items just to increase the font size. So style, I'm going to target the list box item. And the setter will be property font size, and the value, it's going to be 18. Let's see if that's any better. Yeah, that's much better, definitely. All right, so that's that. Let's collapse these. Okay, so we have our first list box, and all right, let's run this and make sure it doesn't break. All right, so we have our list box up and running. Now we can select an item and perform an action on it if we want to. But that brings us to a property that enables us to select this. So the property is selection mode, and by default it's single selection. Okay, so let's take a look at that property and see what other options are available. So I'm going to go into my list box, and here I'm going to type in selection mode. And you'll notice I have 3 values. So single, we already know what that's the default selection mode. We have multiple and extended. So let's try the multiple and run this again. So with multiple, we can select multiple items, as many as you want. That's what multiple allows you to do. Let's check out the extended and run this again. So with extended, if you click on items, you'll see it's similar to single, but if you hold your control key and select, then you're able to select multiple items. So that's extended. Remove, get rid of this and go back to single. Okay. So in reality, this is really hard-coded data. You're not going to be probably use this often unless you're designing your style, styling your item as a list box item, or if this is a fixed list box here, fixed list here, and based on your selection, you're filtering data in another list box. A couple of scenarios that can pop in my head. If you have more scenarios, please drop a comment. I want to get your input too. All right. So next, I'm going to add a couple of maybe buttons here and a text box. So I'm going to add a stack panel. And I want this to be vertically positioned on the bottom and get a height of, let's say, 70. So it's right here, and inside here I'm going to add a button that says the content says add. Close that out. And then I'm going to add a text box. Close that out. Actually, let's get a name too. Let's call this TBX1. And then I'm going to add a button that says delete. Okay. So what I want to do here, when I click add button, the whatever I type in text box needs to be added to the list, and with the delete, I want to remove it from lists. Okay, so I'm going to add a click event here. Let's go to definition. So did I give a name to my list box? Probably not. Let's give it a name too. Let's call this LBX1. Okay. Let's go back to our event handler. So here I just want to say LBX1 dot items dot add and pass in whatever typed into the text box. So text box dot text. Quite simple. All right, so let's try that out. I'm going to type in item 5 and click add. And now we have item 5 added to our list. Similarly, we're going to do add an event handler to the delete button. And this one is going to remove the item from the list box. So the selected item, actually. So I'm going to say if listbox1 dot selected item is not null, then ListBox one dot items dot remove ListBox one dot selected item. Okay, that's quite simple as well. Let's try that out. So if I select this last one and click delete, the item is removed. Okay, can add again, item 4, item 5, and select and delete. Great. So that works fine. All right, so that's that for fixed ListBox. Again, probably not going to be using this quite often. A lot of times the data has to come from somewhere. So let's add another ListBox to second column. I'm going to collapse the first ListBox in the stack panel so we can have some room. I'm going to add another ListBox. So ListBox. And I want this to be in grid.column1, which is the second grid, column. All right, so for the second guy, for second ListBox, I'm going to add a couple of classes that's going to supply the data. So I'm going to go back to code behind and create our first class. So public class, and let's call this to-do item. And I'm going to have a couple of properties here. Type of string, and let's call this name. And the next one, it's going to be a string also, and let's call this image. Okay. Add another class, public class. Let's call this to-do items, plural. This is going to be the one that's going to supply the data. So in here, I'm going to have a static method. So static, actually public static list of to-do item. It's called as get items or get to-do items. Oopsie. Get to-do items. All right, so in here we're going to say var list equals new list of to-do item. And add a couple of items. So list.add new to-do item. Name is going to be whole milk. And the image is going to be milk.png. If you wonder where that's coming from, so I have a few items, a few images here. So we got cow. Wow, cow. Okay, bread and juice. So it should have been cow. All right, let's copy and paste this a couple of times. And let's change this to whole wheat bread. So change the file name to bread.png. Likewise, let's do orange juice or juice and juice.png, I believe. And finally, we gotta return this, return list. Okay. There. Oh, to-do item. All right, so that should be good to go. Now I'm gonna supply the data using the data context. So we can do this few different ways. So I can set the data context right here to this. And actually I can have a property also in here. Let's see, actually let's declare the property outside property list of to-do items. Let's call this item list and set this to to-do items that get to-do items. So I should be able to bind to this list, which is getting the items from here, from the class down below here. Okay, let's try that out. So if I go to my ListBox, or actually I can set the data source here, but then I need to give a name to my ListBox. So let's go ahead and do it here. So item source, I should be able to bind to item list. Now the downside of setting the data context, let's see. The downside of setting data context like this, we don't really get any IntelliSense in the XAML part. So we're kind of blindsided or blind, doing things blindly. But regardless, if you're not sure, you can copy and paste from here. But again, it's kind of doing things blindly. So let's run this and see if it works actually. All right, so we got 3 items here, but with the class name, with the fully qualified class name. So, but we did the binding correctly. We can solve this with a simple overriding the string method here. So override to string method, and I can just simply say return this dot name. That should give me the name of the item. All right, so we got whole milk, whole wheat, and orange juice. So that's a progress, but I really not a big fan of setting the data context like this. So instead, I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to go back to my XAML and open a window.data context tag. And here I'm going to say binding relative resource and set this to relative resource dot, actually not dot, just self. Relative resource dot, space self. So if I close this out, and now I should be able to actually see this. So if I say binding here and try now I can bring in the item list, and I know I'm doing it right. I still don't have the design time data, but this is a progress over setting the data context in the constructor. So at least something. All right. So I want to take this one notch up and add an actually item template. So ListBox dot item template. With this guy, actually, I want to add a little checkbox to the item so we can check it. All right. So data template. In here, I'm going to add a wrap panel. And inside my wrap panel, I need a checkbox. And the content of the checkbox is going to bind to name property, binding name property of the to-do item. So let's run this and see what happens. So all right, we got the checkbox bound to our name property. Let's actually set the vertical alignment to, I think it's vertical, or yes, I believe it's vertical. Content alignment to center, and run this again. That should line up the text and the checkbox. And beautiful. Okay, so it looks much better now. All right. So that's the second list box. And I'm going to add another list box shortly, and we'll do it a little differently. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and add our third list box. And this is going to be in grid.column 2. And let's actually bring that in focus right here. Okay. So this one, I'm going to get the data directly from our to-do items class. So in order to do that, I'm going to add a new property here. Actually, I can just copy and paste from this guy here. Just change the name. Let's copy and paste it in here. Change this to my list. And this one, we don't need a name, the class name, just the method name. Should be enough. All right, so we have my list and set to our method here, static method here. All right, so that's in place. Next, I'm going to set the data context, ListBox dot data context. I'll set this to local to-do items. Fair enough. And then I'm going to set the item source of my list box to binding my list. Okay, now we have our data in our list box. Okay, so that's all good. Next, so for this list box, I want to display the images too. Let's go ahead and do it and create an item template. So listbox dot item template. And in here, we need a data template. And inside my data template, I'm going to add a stack panel. And inside the stack panel, an image. And set the source to binding image, the name of the property. And then add a text block. And set the text property to binding name. Okay, so if I rebuild this and run it, we should have images and text inside my list box. All right, so that's a good progress. A couple issues. First, I gotta resize the stack panels so that the image sizes, they look in uniform. So let's give it a height and height of 150 and a width of 100. Let's run this again. All right, that's more like it. So we have the stack panel all same size. I mean, images are not all same size, but the stack panels, at least they are. So that's a big progress from what we had. Next, I want this actually to display in a wrap panel behavior. In other words, it's going to try to fit all the items in first row. If it can't, I'll move on to the second row and continue from there. So it is Z shape from left to right, left to right. So that's, we're going to do that through an items panel template. So ListBox dot items panel, and inside here I'm going to add an items panel template and tell my item panel template you are a wrap panel, and I'm going to set the is item host property to true. So now the items are listed horizontally. Let's run this and see what it looks like actually in action. We got 1, 2, 3 items. Okay, so we are making progress, but we still have a way to go. So I gotta somehow bring the third one, because it doesn't fit, bring it down below here in the second row. So, and to do that, I'm going to get rid of this scroll bar. So I'm going to go back in my list box here. I'm going to set the hard scroll viewer horizontal scroll bar visibility, and disable that. Okay, so that's going to get rid of the scroll bar and force the items to continue from the next line. Let's run this again. All right, so that's exactly what I wanted. Okay, now we have a little issue, another issue, where since we have a fixed size for our stack panel, the text for these two items doesn't show up properly. So we are going to use what we learned in our text block demo and try to implement that here. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to that. Up here we had a style here for our list box item. And actually, you know what? No, I'm just going to go into my text block down below here and set the text trimming property. Two characters that will insert the three dots we have seen in our text block demo. So if you haven't seen it, go take a look at it. So now we got three dots where it doesn't fit, where the name of the item doesn't fit. We got three dots here, meaning the content can fit in the space, available space, and that thus we have three dots, indicating we have more to it. But see, this is good, but this guy here, we have plenty of space down below, so we can force the second word, the juice, to go down below. And to do that, we're going to add another property and the text wrapping property. So text wrapping, we'll set that to wrap. Okay, let's run this again. All right, so this one's great, but this one is not. So I'm going to change stack from stack panel to dock panel. All right, dock panel, and I'm going to actually, let's run this before we make more changes. Let's see how it looks. We lost text. We lost the text block. So I'm going to set the text block to, or I can set the image first. Set the dock block, dock panel, the dock. Set this to top, and let's see what happens with that. Let's try that first. All right, that's exactly what I want. Okay, so these two are showing the three dots because the content doesn't fit. This one forced it to fit because we had plenty empty space here down below the image. So that's exactly how I wanted it. All right, so that's all good. The next thing, I want to do a little more fine tuning for in general. So the next thing I want to do, when we select an item here, I want it to be highlighted, just indicating that's the active selected item. So to do that, I'm going to just apply to this style here, and that's going to apply all three list boxes. So I'm going to go in here and say style.triggers, data trigger, binding, again, open close curly braces, binding. Property I'm looking for is selected. And the value, if the value is true, then we want to set the property called font weight to a value of semi-bold, demi-bold. Let's try that. And let's run this and test it out. Didn't work. All right, let's see why. So it turns out the reason it didn't work because we should have used property trigger rather than data trigger. So the property trigger, I'm going to change this to property, and we're looking for is selected, and the rest should remain the same. Let's try that out. Select, and now we gain that bold when we select the item. Okay, and this applies to all 3 list boxes. Okay, so that's it for now. Until the next one, take it easy. Bye bye now.